welcome everyone to our What Can I Do with My PhD series. And I'm very happy to introduce Lesley MacNeil today. So Lesley is an associate professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Biomedical Sciences at McMaster University. She has a PhD in molecular genetics from the University of Toronto and completed postdoctoral studies at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Today, Lesley will discuss postdoctoral training, the faculty job search, and the transition from postdoctoral fellow to running an independent research program. Well, it's all yours, Lesley.
Thank you. Okay, so I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about today and who would be attending, and I figured we would have a mix of PhD students and postdocs. So I am talking a little bit about finding a postdoc and a little bit about finding an academic position. But at any time, if you want to ask a question, feel free to put your hand up. If you want to ask it out loud, or if you want to just type it into the chat, I can see the chat, so you can do that as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about me before I start. So I had no family in academia. I had no scientists in my family, but I did decide that I wanted to be a researcher in high school. But overall, I was generally completely clueless about the whole process when I started on my route into academia. So today, I'm an associate professor in biochemistry and biomedical sciences. That's my primary appointment. Primary appointment generally means that's who pays you and who hired you. So I'm in the Department of Biochemistry. I'm also a member of the IIDR, of the Farncombe, and of the Nexus. I'm also the academic lead for the Nexus. So I work on developing academic programs and training opportunities. Also developing fun career series like this one, and giving the talk when we're short a person for the summer. So I hope you're enjoying the seminar series. So some of you probably do know what professors do all day, but I thought I'd just go through and tell you about the mountain of things that we do. So obviously we write grants and papers, we teach. There's also some course development there. So for example, when I started here, I developed a course, Writing for Science, for grad students in the Biochem department. We review papers, we write grants, we serve on grant panels. Grant panels are generally 3 days to a week, and you review anywhere from 40 grants to hundreds of grants. We give talks. We meet with collaborators and we do committee work. So when I first started here, I was on the undergraduate committee that deals with the undergraduate curriculum and thinking about whether we needed new courses and which courses needed updating, and whether we should change prerequisites. All that stuff falls under sort of a committee. After that, I was on the graduate committee. And we evaluate all the applications that come in from graduate students to the department. We also do some evaluation of things like the CGSD, which now are ranked first internally, and then we send them out to the larger pool. So that's part of what that committee does as well. And now I'm on the research advisory committee. So we do things like nominate people for awards, and we organize the seminar series during the year. And now we're also starting to do some EDI work. So that's sort of all in that envelope. In addition to all of those things, we do a lot of administrative work. So there's a lot of time spent doing things like managing funds and grants and hiring people and interviewing people. Many of us work with different professional societies. So I work with the Genetic Society of America. I'm on their EDI committee, so Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I've also helped with planning for some of the conferences, mostly worm conferences. We also do some stuff for professional development. So just to give you an example, I did a training program called Professor Hippo last year, and that is just understanding how to help students with mental health issues and knowing what to do in those situations. I'm also on an EDI committee and I've done a lot of EDI training as well. So we're always sort of continually trying to train and things. And I do a lot of mentoring. So you end up spending a lot of time meeting with students. Sometimes they're your students and sometimes they're not your students. Female professors tend to get a lot of students who are struggling coming to talk to them because they feel more comfortable with women. So you do spend a lot of time with students, and it is kind of a nice thing when you can help someone. So that's all of the, well, maybe not all of the things we do, but it's a lot of things we do. So for me, I started my scientific career at the University of Guelph. I have an undergraduate degree in microbiology. I did co-op at the time, and I had worked for government and realized I did not want to do that. But that I really did like doing research. So I got some research experience. I then did a master's degree in the Department of Biology, where I looked at mammary gland development and tumor formation in mice. But mice weren't really for me. So then I moved on, and I did my PhD at the University of Toronto in the Department of Medical and Molecular Genetics. It's now called the Department of Molecular Genetics. They changed the name. And I did my research at the Lunenfeld Tannenbaum Research Institute. So there I worked on C. elegans, and I worked on development of the nervous system and axonal migration and cell migration. So very developmental, very neuro focused there. So when I finished my PhD, I didn't know exactly what I needed to do, what I wanted to do. I applied to a couple of places. I didn't do a huge search because at the time, my husband is also a scientist, and he had accepted a postdoctoral position at the University of Massachusetts. So there's actually a lot of worm labs at the University of Massachusetts. So for me, I thought, you know what, it's fine. I will find something there. And if not, I'll find something in Boston, which is also close by. So when you're looking for a postdoctoral position, I think the most important thing you can do is find a mentor who's going to support you. You need someone who is going to write reference letters for you on time, because your next step is applying for faculty positions, and you can't risk someone who isn't prioritizing you. You also want to be able to take research with you. So this is a big deal. Usually in your postdoc, you'll develop your project very independently. And what you don't want to happen is to invest all this time, all this effort, all this emotion into your project, and then not be able to take it with you. Because when you can take it with you, this gives you a starting platform to start your independent career. And so, you need to have something that's moving forward. If you don't have that, it will take you a lot longer to start your independent career, because you're starting from nothing. You're trying not to step on your past supervisor's toes. If they've decided they're keeping your project, you don't want to compete with them, because generally they will have a large lab with lots of resources, and you will have, you and 2 students. So it's kind of career suicide to try and compete with your postdoc supervisor. You don't want to get scooped by your postdoc supervisor. What you do want is someone who's going to say, yes, you've developed this, you can take it with you, I support you, I will write this in your letters that I'm going to let you take this. And you want someone who's going to continue being your mentor and supporting you when you leave. So this is really important in terms of making sure that you have opportunities, sometimes even as an independent investigator. So once you're an associate professor, you still need reference letters for things. So you need to keep a good relationship with your postdoc supervisor. You also want to make sure that you find a place that has a positive and professional work environment. And you want to see that trainees are still in science. So you want to see that this isn't going to be, absolute hell for, the next 5-7 years. So again, I'm going to say, choose your mentor wisely. You may be very tempted to go to a lab where the PI has a really high H index, they're really well known. But if it turns out that this PI is a monster, you will have problems Generally, when there's a really terrible work environment, the PI is not prioritizing you. And so that will mean that if they decide that you're not ready to apply for jobs, you're not going to get reference letters. If they decide they like what you're working on and they want to keep it, they will keep it. You don't generally have people who are horrible bosses, but are great mentors. It doesn't really work that way. So being in a really toxic work environment, don't do it. First sign of trouble, you should just run for it. So how you know whether or not these mentors are going to be good people is you want to make sure you talk to people. And this cartoon is actually something that happened to somebody I know. They went to visit a lab and said, "Can I talk to the trainees in your lab?" And the PI said no. So right there, you know that PI is saying no because they know that the people in their lab are not going to say good things about them. So when you visit a lab, make sure that you talk to people who are there, get a lay of the land, see, you know, how many people are there and how many people are succeeding. It's great to go to a lab where, you know, there's really high impact papers being published. But if for every high impact paper being published, there's 20 people who have nothing, that's not a place you want to go. The other thing that I would say about talking to people when you're on the job market or when you're looking for a postdoc is you have to sometimes read between the lines. So for example, one of my friends interviewed for a postdoc at a lab where she asked, you know, what is this supervisor like to work for? And the trainees there were clearly terrified, but they didn't say anything that on its face was overly bad. But when asked, what is this person like to work for, there would always be a long pause. And then they would try to say something that was kind of neutral. And so my friend had a bad feeling, so she didn't go there, but she ended up going to another lab at the same institution. So then when she got there, she found out that this person is an absolute monster who terrorizes their trainees. And so the trainees were so scared to say anything and get in trouble that they weren't, you know, telling the full truth to, you know, a stranger who comes in. So it's not, you know, maybe it's not that surprising that they wouldn't be 100% open with you, but so you have to read a little bit between the lines. And sometimes going around and trying to find someone who has left the lab, who doesn't really have any reason not to tell you the truth, is also a good strategy in that case. So I think I've said most of this, but definitely red flags. If there's a lot of postdocs in the lab and, you know, only one of them is publishing, that's a red flag. If you run into a situation where postdocs are being put on the same project and are competing, that's very bad. As a postdoc, you need papers that are yours. So you need first author papers. And if you're competing with someone on a project, you know, there's a chance that you won't end up with the first author paper. It's also not great if you have very little interaction with the PI. So if they're never there and you're not getting any sort of mentoring, then there's not a lot of value in that. I mean, there are exceptions. There are people who have their labs set up in ways where there's support within the lab. So sometimes in the US, there's a position called research assistant professor. So that's someone who is a professor, but who doesn't apply for the grants. They just sort of run things in the lab. In Canada, there are positions like research associates, and the research associates play a very similar role. So those are people who are there for support, and typically PIs who understand that they're not going to be around very much, they'll hire people who can help manage day-to-day issues and problems and help you out with that. So that's okay, as long as there's a system in place to have support. You don't want to just be dropped in with no help, no mentoring, nothing. The other red flag I would say is an unprofessional work culture. So you don't want to go to a place where people are always having, inappropriate conversations, making inappropriate comments, bullying people, saying nasty things about people. It's not a good place to work, and it's kind of an indication that is acceptable to the PI. And so if you run into any trouble, you'll be on your own. So these are all red flags. So how do you find a good postdoc mentor? One thing I would say is start thinking about it early. You don't have to put a lot of, you don't have to be stressed about this. It's just keep a list somewhere. Talk to people at conferences, get intel. It's a lot easier at a conference if you run into someone from, a big shots lab and you say, hey, you're in, this lab. Oh yeah, how do you like it? What's going on? What's the lab like? You can get sort of informal information about it without too much stress. When you read papers, take notes of the authors on the papers that you love. Also think about, maybe what you would want to learn. You don't want to do exactly the same thing in your postdoc that you did in your PhD, because once you move on to an independent position, part of that is being an independent person. And it's a little bit easier to create your own brand or your own scientific personality if you can meld things that you learned at different stages in your career. And then it's easy to show, okay, I've used all these pieces that I've gathered through my training to come up with this really unique research plan. So you want to be your own person, be unique, stand out from your postdoc supervisor. So if you can, combine things that you learned PhD postdoc, that's fantastic. You also want to think about what your needs are. So if you're thinking, hey, I might want to do the teaching stream, I'm not really sure yet, I might want to do research, I might want to do teaching, that can impact where you decide to do your postdoc. So for example, I did my postdoc at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. There's no undergraduate program there, and so there is really no opportunity to gain teaching experience just because the people there don't teach. So if you're interested in teaching, you want to go somewhere maybe where there might be that option, and you want a supervisor who also supports that. So, those options may be open, but you may have a postdoc supervisor who says, no, you can't do that. You need to be in the lab 24/7. And if you're really committed to wanting to teach, then that's not going to be a good place for you. If you're interested in industry, then maybe you want to go to a lab that has either industry links. So someone who collaborates with industry, that can get you some really good networking opportunities. You may also want to do go to a lab where you'll learn specific techniques that are valuable in industry and what you want to do in industry. So that's also a consideration. You can also check them out on Twitter. It isn't foolproof. I would say if you find out someone is a horrible person on Twitter, they're probably a horrible person. But if you read their Twitter profile and they keep posting about, what a fantastic mentor they are, they're not necessarily a fantastic mentor. There are many people who post all of these things about supporting their trainees and being great mentors. And I know them, and they're horrible mentors. So just keep it in mind. You can check them out on Twitter, see what kind of person they are. Do they celebrate other people? Are they proud of their trainees? Does it seem like they are good mentors? But, don't leave it only to Twitter. In deciding what you should do in your postdoc, as I said, you should try to learn something new. You need to publish papers, of course. You want to apply for funding. It's great if you have a supervisor who will walk through how you apply for a grant, and if you have a postdoc supervisor who will actually name you on grants, that's fantastic. Not everyone will do that, but in some cases, some PIs will put their postdocs on as collaborators because it gives them sort of a CV item, and so it's helpful to them, but this doesn't happen for everyone. You also want to be able to, when you're applying for a faculty position, you want to be able to distinguish yourself. So that can be either in the techniques that you know or in your area of expertise. You want to be valuable and you want to be unique. So you definitely want to think about how you gather that uniqueness. So as far as techniques, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, when cryo-EM became more prevalent, I guess, there were many positions in Canada for people to use cryo-EM, and they really had a hard time finding people to fill these voids because there weren't enough postdocs who had that knowledge. And it is hard to predict, you know, from now till whatever time you're going to be applying, but having a very specialized technique is definitely an advantage on the job market. Again, if you want a teaching position, find a place where you can get experience teaching. Here at McMaster, McPherson has a number of programs that are available to postdocs. So if you look at McPherson, the McPherson website, and you find different opportunities for training in teaching and also doing practice teaching, those are open to everyone at McMaster. So they're open to students and postdocs as well. So if you're interested in teaching, that's really a great place to go to get that experience. You also want to interview at more than one place. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I can tell you I did this when I applied to grad school because I was very naive and I didn't understand how the world worked, but I had decided I wanted to work in this one lab. I was super excited. I wanted to work in this one lab. I came for my interview and I didn't like the PI. I thought, this is not going to work for me. I don't like this person. And so then I was kind of scrambling to say, okay, where else should I apply? You should make it part of your plan to interview at more than one place. That also gives you the lay of the land, and it gives you, you know, the ability to compare different places. No place is perfect, but if you've got multiple options, you can sort of think about, you know, what's good for me? What can I live with? What can I not live with? So for me, my postdoctoral training was 6 years. This really depends on what field you're in. Different fields have different lengths of training. I would say anything with animal models where you're studying development or physiology, those tend to be longer postdocs. And it also kind of depends, I suppose, where you are. But 6 years was pretty normal for where I was. So in my postdoc, I learned to work with yeast, and I learned to do high throughput screening. I did lots of assays with the Sanger robot, but I also kept my expertise in C. elegans research alive. So when I went to the lab, their systems biology lab. I worked in Marianne Walhout's lab. So their systems biology lab, they do focus on C. elegans, but most of the work that they do in the lab is interaction work, and it's done in yeast, not in C. elegans. So my value to the lab was that I was a C. elegans biologist. And so when I came to the lab, I sort of divided my time between learning all the systemsy stuff and continuing on with the C. elegans work. No one has any questions yet. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to pause for a second. If you want to ask something, feel free to put your hand up. If not, I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so when you're in your postdoc, when are you ready to start applying for faculty positions? And so for a research position, your publications are going to determine this. You pretty much, you're not going to be able to start applying for faculty positions that are research-wise, that are research-focused, until you have a pretty good publication record. So you want at least one first author paper. You want it to be a significant paper. If not, you know, you want to have a lot of smaller papers, that's okay too. For a teaching position, really, you can start applying anytime. Most of the time with a teaching position, there isn't that requirement for publications, but they do want, for most places, they want you to have some experience teaching. So if that's the route you want to go, you want to make sure that you're getting that experience. So when I started applying for faculty positions, I can tell you I had a good publication record. I had no teaching experience. I had TA'd. I supervised a lot of graduate students as a postdoc. So University of Massachusetts, their graduate program, they have a graduate program, no undergrad program, but their graduate program is a rotation system. And so you spend a certain number of weeks in each of the labs. So I supervised, I was continually supervising grad students, and some stayed in the lab and some didn't. But I did have that. I had that on my CV. One of the grad students that I supervised is down here, Emma Watson. So Emma and I also have a co-first author paper. So it also showed, that I had mentored someone and they had been productive. These are the first author papers that I had in my postdoc. I also had some internal authorships, and I have a Nature Neuroscience paper from my PhD and some other internal publications as well. I had a record of awards, so I had won scholarships, although I don't know that it's really that important, scholarships, because it's, it's not a high success rate, and there are a lot of factors involved there. So I did have that, and I had, although I had helped writing grants, I was never named on a grant. So I didn't have anything as a named investigator or a collaborator, but that was actually okay. I was pretty successful getting job interviews. I only applied to about 25 jobs and I had like 17 interviews. So I did pretty well on the interview front. But I accepted. It was such a horrible experience. I'm going to say that I accepted the first job that I was offered, and then I canceled the interviews that I had after that. But I mean, I wanted to come back to Canada, so it's not like I really sacrificed. I did want to come back to Canada, and so this was good for me. So when you're ready, and even before you're ready to start applying, it doesn't hurt to start looking at job advertisements and looking at what they're asking for. So this is where you will find faculty positions advertised. There's a bunch of job sites where you will find them. Glassdoor has them, Indeed, University Affairs, Higher Ed Jobs. If you go specifically to the university websites, all of their faculty positions are advertised there. So this is an example of University of Toronto. It says faculty opportunities, and it shows you what types of positions they're hiring for. You can also go to journal websites. So journals like Cell Science and Nature, and also society journals. So genetics, or if you work in a very specific field and there's a journal that's very specific to your field, there will be advertisements sometimes in those journals. Sorry, I was going to say also some of the journal websites that have specifically career sections now, they also have some really nice articles on careers, on how to write teaching statements, on how to write EDI statements, how to choose a place to work. They have a lot of great articles anyway, if you're on the job market. So check out, Science Careers and Nature Careers and Cell. They have some really nice articles there. If you're a member of an academic society, and even if you're not, there will also be job boards for some of those. So for example, the Genetics Society of America, pretty much all of the C. elegans conferences are organized through the GSA. So the GSA is, my people. So the type of job I would be looking for would be advertised on the GSA job board. The GSA job board will also have postdoc advertisements. So if you're interested in postdoc positions, society websites are also a great place to find those. So this is what a standard advertisement looks like for a faculty position. This is for the University of PEI. And so it tells you, it's the Department of Biology. It's a 10-year track, assistant professor position. And they're looking for someone with expertise in comparative animal physiology. So it's broad, but not, they don't want a microbiologist. So I would say that most job postings are like this. They have sort of an area of research that they're interested in recruiting for. And usually it has to do with strategic plans for the department and what expertise they feel are missing. In some cases, it's completely open and they'll just say, open to all fields of research. They also tell you that there's teaching involved. So you're going to teach undergraduate courses in the life science specialization. So if you apply for this job, you want to go look at what the life sciences specialization is and what you could teach in there. So that's something that you would add to your cover letter. You would say, I could teach these courses. And it's not a bad idea if you have inside intel, maybe they're recruiting because someone is retiring or someone is leaving and they have a void. If you can find out what they teach, then, it's great to be able to fill that void and say, yes, I could teach comparative animal physiology too. It's great if you can name the course codes as well in your letter, because then you can say, I can teach these courses. And you're also telling them, I went to the trouble of looking at your website, examining your program. I really care about this. The advertisement will also tell you when they expect you to start. And they'll tell you, it's negotiable or not. That will usually depend on funding or teaching. So in some cases, it depends very much on how the university runs, but in some cases, when they open up a faculty position, it needs to go through Senate, Board of Governors, all these, you have to jump over all these hurdles to get that faculty position opened. And in some cases, the money is available for that position. And if they don't hire anyone for that position, it is closed. So they have to start the whole process all over again, and it's not guaranteed they'll get the money for that. So that's why, in some cases, the start date isn't negotiable. So they may need to, spend that money and get things going. But it's something that you can, talk about at your interview or after your interview. The application will also give you the instructions. So this just tells you, this is all the things that you need to send us. And this one is pretty standard. They need a cover letter. The cover letter, you introduce yourself, you say, I am this person, this is my area of expertise, these are the papers I've published. I'm really excited about your department because these are the courses I could teach, these are the people I could collaborate with, I'm very excited. That's sort of what your cover letter is. It's a summary of everything else that you're submitting. So generally this will be a page, maybe 2-page max. You want to put your CV in, obviously. You want to focus, depending on what the position is. If it's a research focused position, you want to make sure that all of your research is front and center. And if it's a teaching centered one, you want to make sure that you're teaching and any experience you have that might be relevant to teaching, that is front and center. For most research positions, they want a research proposal. So a research proposal is sort of telling them what you're going to do for the next 5 to 10 years. And if you can frame this around grants, that's even better. It differs between institutions, and this will be hugely frustrating when you're applying for faculty jobs. Sometimes it's 2 pages, sometimes it's 5 pages, sometimes you'll get a university that decides they want something that's segmented. So they'll give you subtitles and you have to fill those in. It's a lot of work to apply for jobs. They'll also ask for a teaching philosophy or teaching experience. Teaching philosophy is just your views on teaching, what you think is important, your strategy, what you plan to do, what has struck you as successful in your career. But a lot of people applying for research positions don't have any teaching experience. So if you see teaching philosophy and experience, don't stress too much, just, apply. You should apply broadly, and you should apply to as many positions that you think you may fit what they're asking for. Recently, a lot of places have implemented an EDI statement. So you have to put in a statement on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how you plan to have an EDI-friendly environment in your lab and in your practices as a professor. So here would be where you would put in, I've taken this training. These are my strategies. This is how I would make sure things are equitable. And that can be relating to how you hire people, how you mentor people, making sure that, the people who are not the squeaky wheels get the same degree of mentorship as everybody else. And so before you write this, I think the most important thing is make sure you know what you're talking about. So don't write something like, I will treat everyone equally, period, done. That just tells me that you have no idea what the problems are. So you need to research this. There's plenty of articles out there about how to write an EDI statement. And it'll do you good to read them. Generally, you also need 3 references. So when I applied, I had my postdoc supervisor, and because in my PhD I was co-supervised, I had both of my PhD supervisors as letter writers. You can also have your postdoc supervisor, a collaborator, your PhD supervisor. You can have 2 collaborators, your postdoc supervisor, whoever you think is going to give you the best reference letter and be the most relevant. So I have a friend who could not get a reference letter from his PhD supervisor. So that makes it very hard on you if you end up in that situation where your PhD supervisor has decided that you're not cut out for research and they are not going to write you a letter. So there are, in that case, you need to start cultivating reference letters early. So you need to think about, okay, who else can write me a letter? Can anybody explain why I don't have a letter from my PhD supervisor? Who is on my side? In his case, I can tell you that he had a very successful postdoc, and he is now a faculty member. So he managed to navigate that by sort of an inside track, I would say. So he was interested in working in a specific lab, and he had gone to grad school with someone else who was in the same department. And so that person stuck their neck out and said, listen, I know this guy. This is what the issue is. This is, I can vouch for this person. So, if you end up in that situation, you just have to think about how you're going to navigate around it. So don't stress too much. Okay. So at the end of the job application, you'll see this EDI statement, and it basically tells you that the university is committed to equity, diversity, inclusion, and reconciliation. And so I'll tell you why this statement is here. So what it means is it's there to encourage a broader pool of applicants. So if you imagine that you are someone who is from a minority group and you find this job advertisement for this department and you take a look at the department and it's all white people, you think, maybe this isn't the place for me. So, in 2023, this is a huge problem. So universities are just saying, we're fixing the problem. We have, made sure that people have EDI training. We have an EDI policy. Please apply. What it doesn't mean is that the positions are reserved for minority groups. So if you read this and you think, oh, this is a job for minorities, it is not. It's just saying, please, everyone apply. We want a really broad pool of applicants. It doesn't mean that they're reserved for minority groups. And I can tell you, like recently, if you look, the University of Guelph has had some hires recently, and they always have an EDI statement. But if you look at who they hired, they didn't hire people from minority groups. So the statement is there to capture a broader pool of applicants. I would say the one exception is if you see an application that is a cluster hire and it specifically says they're looking for, Black scholars or something like that, that means that is really what they're looking for. And they're trying to correct their lack of diversity. So, but other than that, you can apply to pretty much anything. So when you go, no one has any questions yet? Okay. So when you go to do your interviews and when you're thinking about where you want to land, the things you want to know you want to know what you're dealing with. So what is this position exactly? What is expected of me? And what resources are there to support me? So there's a few different types of academic positions. There's tenure track. These are mostly permanent after promotion to associate professor, unless you, do something really egregious. You're mostly there for, the rest of your career. There are also non-tenure track positions. So these are positions that require regular review and renewal. So for example, if you got a job at Sick Kids or at the Lunenfeld or at similar research institutes tend to go on sort of a 5 or 7 year cycle. So you're hired for 5 years, you have a review at 5 years, they renew you, you have a review 5 years again, and they just, you're on a renewal cycle. So the advantage for, if you're thinking, oh my God, that sounds a lot scarier than tenure track, it is in some ways, but in other ways, if you think about Sick Kids or the Lunenfeld or the Whitehead, these are institutions that have a lot of resources. And so you sort of have you sort of do a trade-off for, okay, well, there's all these resources for me, but I don't have that permanent tenure track position, but maybe that's okay. I'm going to listen to everybody else's experience and decide from there. Positions that are CLA or contractually limited, these are temporary positions, they're term limited. So it means that they're not permanent jobs and there's no opportunity for promotion. You may have opportunity within the same institution once you've worked there to apply for a different type of position, but there is no direct movement from CLA into something permanent. So these are generally teaching positions that are CLA, although there are exceptions where universities do strange things with CLA. The other thing you want to know with your research position or with your academic position is what the time division is. So this sort of determines what your effort will be. So generally they'll tell you a ratio, they'll tell you something like, oh, it's a 50-40-10, and you're supposed to know what that means. But what that means is there's a ratio of, oops, I got this one backwards, research teaching service or teaching research service. Anyway, they'll tell you which percentage. That means 50% of your time is reserved for research, 40% is teaching, 10% is service. So 40% teaching is a pretty standard block across Canada, I would say, but it means different things at different institutions. So you want to make sure you understand what exactly that means. Is that 2 courses or is that 4 courses? You want to make sure you understand how they define that so that you know how exactly you're going to be spending your time. Service is all of those committees that I talked about. So the committee service that you do is included in there as well. So there are also places where they're more research intensive and you have more time for research, and there's some that are more teaching intensive where you have, mostly teaching. Zudong, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I have a question for here, the time division. So it's like So what's the total time for? Is the total time for like 5 days a week, like 8 hours a day, or it's like, so what's the total time for this time duration?
That is a really good question. So I don't know what their idea was when they first came up with this split, but I would say I have never been able to get away with only working 40 hours a week. So I pretty much am working all the time.
Okay.
It's a terrible thing to say, but yeah, this is also why I say it depends on, so different institutions mean different things when they say teaching, 40% of your time is teaching. Sometimes they'll do that based on either in-person hours, or they'll give you in-person hours plus a certain amount of prep time, and they'll estimate that number of hours. And I think that I don't know if that comes out to, you know, a normal 40-hour work week once they do that. But I would say I don't know many people in academia who work 40 hours a week. I think they work a lot more.
Yeah, it makes sense because I'm a first year PhD student and I observe my supervisor. It seems like they work all the time, like they're waking or something. So it's like, feels like if they're awake, they work. So, so I'm not sure if like they give you amount of like workload, like the how many courses you need to teach and how many like the students you need to mentor and the project you need to do and something, and you just need to manage them to finish them. Is the case like this or?
Yeah, I would say it's more you have a certain amount of work to do. And I would say if you did everything to perfection, you would never be able to sleep. So you kind of have to think, okay, there are some things that I need to do that need to be perfect. You know, my grant needs to be perfect. But maybe, you know, writing a paragraph for a poster that someone's posting somewhere, that doesn't need to be perfect. I shouldn't spend an evening on it. I should just spend, you know, 30 minutes on it. So I would say a lot of academia, one of the important things is time management and understanding things that are critical and spending the most time on those, and also trying to make sure you're prioritizing yourself, because you'll be asked to do a million things that, you know, I am the worst at saying no. I am unable to say no. And I end up saying yes to these things I don't have time to do, and they're not, you know, particularly important for my career, my CV, anything like that. And then I end up sacrificing time I could be spending on things that are more critical to me. So yeah, a lot of it is trying to balance. Haley, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I guess just like a question to build off of that one, like what does your downtime look like? Like vacation, holidays, what's that situation?
I'm really bad at vacation. I always plan to take vacation and then I take vacation, but I still do these meetings that are important, or I go away, but then I work on a grant. And so I have not been, I'm trying to be better at that, because I think it does, you know, it clears your mind, it refocuses you when you can take a vacation. But what I do, I have 2 dogs. So, you know, when I leave here, I take my dogs out for a couple of hours, and that sort of clears my mind. And then I make dinner, and then I do what I call the second shift. And I do all the stuff that I didn't finish during the day until I go to bed. But some days, you know, there's some things that are more intellectually taxing. And once you finish them, you just really can't, you know, you're spent. That's it. So like when you submit a grant, and I find sometimes teaching is like that as well. So right after the class that I taught last year is a 3-hour block. And I found, you know, right after that 3 hours, I had no focus. So you have to do something to clear your mind. So for me, if I'm at home, I do jigsaw puzzles because it's brainless and all I do all day is think. And so I kind of enjoy just shutting off and doing something like jigsaw puzzles and just clearing my mind. How do you find universities are with faculty who are parents? Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't have kids, so I can't speak personal experience there. But I know that there are a lot of challenges, especially for women. So now we have, women and men can both take leave. So there's maternity leave and there's paternity leave. But the studies that they've done are that men use paternity leave to write papers, and they get a lot more done in their paternity leave than women. So it actually helps men, but for women, taking the maternity leave harms them in some ways. I mean, you have to take it. There's no way around that. But so that's kind of a struggle. And I think that universities haven't completely acknowledged the impact. You do get, in terms of when you apply for grants and when you're up for promotion, you do get additional time. So that doesn't count as part of your, typically you go up for promotion in 5 years. So if you took maternity leave in there, you get 6 years, and they've also extended windows where you're eligible for things to account for maternity leave and parental leave. Haley?
Yeah, another question. So what would you say the best way is to prepare yourself for that postdoc to professor transition once you have that job? Like, I can see the newer professors on the floor, and all of a sudden you're worrying about buying equipment and things that you never really had to think about as a postdoc if you were doing research or teaching. But I guess like the ins and outs of running this tiny business that is your lab.
Yeah, I think to prepare yourself, one thing to think about is the equipment that you need. And this is something that will come up in your interview as well. I think I put this on the, okay. So it's important both for your interview as well as for when you're starting. Think about the equipment that you need and don't overthink it. Don't spend 2 hours to save $50. It's hard when you're first starting out before you have grants. You just see money going out and you don't see money coming in, and it's really stressful because you think, oh my God, what if it's 2 years until I get a grant? What if it's 3 years? What if it's 5? So it's difficult not to spend a lot of time, trying to save 3 cents on tips or something along those lines. But so think about the equipment that you need. Think about the type of positions that are available and where you're going to get funding from. So just quickly, I'll tell you that the US has this type of position that Canada doesn't have. They're called soft money positions, where you have to get your salary from grants. So you have a certain number of years where they pay your salary, or it's included in your startup package and you pay your own salary. And then after that, you have to get it from grants. Canada doesn't have those positions because we can't put salary on operating grants. You have to get a specific, you get a CRC. There used to be additional methods to get salary support, but there's very few. Most of the private agencies have cut them off. There used to be a new investigators award that's gone now. So basically it's CRC. The other thing I would say is understand the research landscape of wherever you're going. So US and Canada are slightly different, but if you're coming to Canada, this is sort of the research landscape. So for operating funds where you run the lab and you pay your students and postdocs, there's CHR, NSERC, New Frontiers in Research Fund, and then there's private foundations like the Alzheimer's Association, Parkinson's Canada, things like that. CHR is health related. The main one you would be applying for would be a project grant. Those are relatively high compared to NSERC. NSERC can't be health related, and you can only hold one. Project grants, you can have more than one, but for NSERC, it's programmatic and you can only have one. NFRF is another method. There's 2 different types of grants. This is generally interdisciplinary research, so it's teams, and they're high risk and high reward as well, they fund. Sandy?
Yeah, thank you, Lesley. Awesome talk. Just a quick question, if you can give us more details on CRC, like process and time limits, or if it has a time frame, and just a little bit of that.
So, so CRC is a salary award, so it pays your salary. A lot of times positions come with a CRC. So once you accept that position, they will automatically nominate you for CRC. And that's usually in the application or in the advertisement. It'll say this is a CRC, blah, blah, blah. I think it's 10 years past your PhD when you're eligible. I have a huge problem with this. I will go on for hours saying how stupid this is.
Sounds like they like it.
Yeah, this is from the time of your PhD graduation. So most other things are sort of from the time of your first position, but CRC goes back to your PhD, which I find is different because there's different norms for postdocs in different fields. And it also, you don't have a lot of power in your postdoc. So if you were sort of slowed down or held back by things that were out of your control, this, you know, has a big impact for CRC. Other than that, your university, so the university has to nominate you for a CRC, so you can't just apply for a CRC. The university has to nominate you, but once the university nominates you, it's pretty guaranteed that you're going to get the CRC. So it's, you know, entirely up to the university.
And sorry, is that also competitive somehow, like within the university nomination?
It's competitive within the university to some degrees, but there's sort of different streams. So at McMaster, sometimes they will have specific ones that they advertise, like CRC in cancer research or something like that. And then there's a pool that everybody applies to, and then it's internally ranked and they decide who they're going to send forward. So, but once the university decides that they're nominating you, it's pretty guaranteed that you're going to get it. I don't know anyone who was nominated by their university and didn't get it.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I am running out of time, but I'm gonna, if anybody wants these slides, I can send them to them. So don't stress. But when you go for your interview, they will ask you about many things. And the big categories would be about your research, where you're going to get funding, teaching, what you're going to teach, how you're going to manage your time and resolve conflicts. And they're probably also going to ask you what you need. So they'll ask you about equipment. The reason they're asking you about this is because they need to know what you need for starting your research program and what equipment you need to buy and that they need to include in your package. A lot of weird things happened to me when I had my interviews. So if weird things happen to you as well, don't worry, it's normal. This really bizarre things that happened to me. My favorite was the guy who just stared at me. I assumed, you know, this is an interview. They're going to ask me questions, but that's not exactly what happened. Someone just stared at me, and, you know, I would ask them questions and they'd give me one-word answers, and it was horribly uncomfortable. So yeah, but don't worry. Okay. And since we're running out of time, I will tell you that this is a really heartbreaking process applying for a faculty position. You will get a lot of rejections, and it's really hard, but don't take this personally. Sometimes they didn't hire you because the fit in the department, they just didn't see you collaborating a lot with people in the department because of what other people in the department do. Sometimes they needed someone to teach something specific and another candidate was an expert. They may have expertise that they just lost and they want to build that back into the department. So it's more about what you work on than anything else you've done. Sometimes you're just going to be too expensive and they don't have the funds to do that. I went on 2 interviews where they didn't hire any of the candidates. So both interviews, they had 400 applicants. They interviewed 4 people and they didn't hire any of us. So in one case, it was because the committee couldn't agree, and so they didn't hire anybody. So that happens, and you just have to go with it and keep going. Sandy, did you have another question?
No, sorry.
Oh,
Is it
from
down? I
before.
think lower. Yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So when you have an offer, you want to think about, can you succeed with what they're offering? Is it enough to start your research program? Can you actually buy the equipment that you need with that? And see whether there's room for negotiation. And when you're negotiating, you want to not just say, I want another $50,000. You want to say, I really need to buy these 3 microscopes. They're vital to my research program. If you gave me another $50,000, I could, afford to do that. There's also things you can negotiate, like your salary, protected time. You can say, I would like to not teach for 2 years. The amount of startup you get, discounts on services. So you can negotiate. So for example, if you came to McMaster, you could say, I would like a discount on all the services from the CMCB for the next 2 years. And so that's something you can negotiate. CFI allotment as well. CFI is an equipment grant. You just get equipment, space, all things you can do.
Thank you very much for your talks. I'm wondering, so what's the difference between PhD and postdoc in reference like academic, like what's your responsibility and what you learn and something?
Sorry, what's the difference between PhD and postdoc in terms of?
Yeah, like when you want to get academic, so it's postdoc just do the same thing like the PhD for 6 years, 7 years, or it has different?
Oh, I see. So I would say postdoc, you're much more independent, and the direction of your project is, you're driving that direction more than when you were in your PhD. So the difference between PhD and postdoc would be, with PhD, you're completing your project and you're moving on to something else. With postdoc, you're trying to become independent. So you're developing your own research program and you're hoping to take some of that with you. So it's kind of a little bit different mindset, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Well, if not, I'm sure Lesley is open to any emails. And if you don't have her email, you can easily find that online, or maybe we can send that out with the slides when we do that. But thank you so much, Lesley. That was a fantastic talk and super informative. I think it helps out a lot of people.
Thanks, Haley.
No problem. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you at the next seminar.